If this week's podcast sounds a little low, you will have to forgive us. I am, for sure. I think we are, as a pair. I'm pretty sure Matt is as well. And that is because boxing's bubble has been punctured today by the news that filtered through in the middle of the afternoon that Conor Benn has thrown up a positive test. This great sport, to an extent, shaken to its core once again. This is actually the second pod we recorded today, and this is a very different one to that which we put out earlier on this morning. I say put out, recorded. You'll never hear it, probably, because it was full of verve and enthusiasm. Matt and I were genuinely all in for this fight. Eubank Jr. against Conor Benn. I think I was as excited as I've been for any fight and for any build-up in quite some time. I'd probably go back to 2017 and the first Canelo-Golovkin fight for the last time I was getting in this kind of mood for a big fight build-up. But this does change everything, I think it's fair to say. We will still try and deal with it as professionally and as enthusiastically as we can. But I don't think there's any doubt, Matthew, that we feel differently about the fight now. And I'm pretty sure that probably echoes the sentiments of many, many boxing fans across the world. And I'm sure plenty of our regular listeners too. How are you feeling?
Feeling really, really glum, to be honest with you, Alex. And I was aware we were going to record this podcast again and felt like I needed to have a word with myself so that it isn't completely downbeat. But how can you not be downbeat about the events of today? You do your best to look at it from everybody's point of view. First of all, you look at it from the promoter's point of view, I suppose. Their job is to put on an event, and a huge event, and it would and it might still be a huge event between Conor Benn and Chris Eubank Jr. You look at it from the fighter's point of view, who, regardless of what has happened, they have trained exceptionally hard and they're expecting to be paid. And not just the fighters in the main event, the fighters on the undercard, and you just think what they must be, or attempt to empathise with what they must be feeling now. You look at it then from your own point of view, and frankly, it's one of absolute disgust. I can't disguise that. I mean, to talk you through it as best as I can, as succinctly as I can. I got up this morning after putting an issue of Boxing News I was so very proud of to bed last night. Front cover Bloodline, the reboot of a brutal and savage rivalry. Maybe 30 pages in that were dedicated to this fight. I don't think there was a bad word said about the fight in all of those pages. And I was looking forward to doing the podcast with you this morning. You were in a wonderful mood. I was in a wonderful mood. We were bouncing off each other. And it's very nice that when that occurs, that we don't have anything to moan about. And we were not moaning. We were genuinely excited. We were talking about doing bonus podcasts, one tomorrow, another one on Friday, another one on Saturday, perhaps another one on Sunday. We were that invested in this fight. I took my dog for a walk after I'd recorded said podcast. Came back, sat down, was just about to send my sound file to Darren, the producer, when the news broke, approximately 11:30 this morning, that Conor Benn had failed a test. And it is... Even now, after all these years of covering the sport, the reaction was one of disbelief. No, surely he hasn't. Trace elements of the substance, clomiphene, were discovered by the Voluntary Anti-Doping Association following a test that we understand took place at the start of September. Voluntary Anti-Doping Association, VADA, were employed on the instruction of both camps to carry out additional testing to that of the United Kingdom Anti-Doping, UKAD, the official anti-doping agency recognised by the British Boxing Board of Control. It is important to say that although there was an adverse test from that VADA testing, all UKAD tests have come back negative. And it is only the A sample of that VADA test that has thus far been tested and tested positive for what is a prohibited substance. The B sample, for whatever reason, has yet to be tested. So the official line is there's no rule violation has yet occurred. People that are kind of waiting for the B sample to appear could be waiting a long time. We've been down this road before with fights before. But for those that are not aware or those that think an A sample and a B sample are in some way different, they're not. It's essentially the same sample split into two containers. To my knowledge, the A sample has never differed from the B sample in all of the years that drug testing has been involved in boxing. I think there's been one or two occasions in athletics where something has occurred and it's been found that the samples have been tampered with, but nothing whatsoever has ever changed from the A sample to the B sample in boxing. Bit of background on the substance. It's a selective estrogen receptor modulator, most commonly used in female fertility treatments. According to the United States Anti-Doping Agency, the substance can alter testosterone levels in both male and female athletes and has also been used as a masking agent. It is on the banned list of WADA, which is the World Anti-Doping Agency, and UKAD. According to WADA, clomiphene has also appeared as an undeclared ingredient in black market products sold on the internet for performance-enhancing use. Something isn't right here. It's just something isn't right. We're getting no explanation as to how that, however small that trace may be, we're getting no explanation whatsoever about how it could have appeared in the system of Conor Benn. No explanation whatsoever. What we are getting is attempts to go back and look at certain rules and regulations and how they can be bent and formed to fit. I digress. I apologise. Let's move on from that. So that news broke at 11 to 11:30. 12:45-ish, Callie Sowland, who is of Wasserman Boxing, was then on Talk Sport discussing this test, and he said that conversations had taken place between Benn and Eubank, and the fight would go ahead. The fighters had agreed that they wanted to fight; it would go ahead. While that interview was taking place live on Talk Sport, Matchroom released a statement to say that the fight was going to go ahead. All of this time, obviously, I'm trying to reach the British Boxing Board of Control for comment, and I can't get anything back. They've obviously got numerous other things to deal with than respond to us for comment. I completely, 100% understand that. At 2:05 this afternoon, so this is about an hour and a half after Sowland was talking to Talk Sport, about an hour and 20 minutes after Matchroom released their statement saying the fight was going to go ahead, the British Boxing Board of Control said on the evening of October 4th, the board of the British Boxing Board of Control Limited resolved that the contest between Chris Eubank Jr. and Conor Benn, scheduled to take place on October 8th, is prohibited as it is not in the interests of boxing. That was communicated to the boxers and the promoters involved on the morning of October the 5th, which as we speak is this morning. So that information was passed on to the boxers and the promoters. The promoters subsequently, through different channels, publicly said that the fight will go ahead and the boxers wanted it to go ahead. And then everything starts to gather pace. The open workouts today went ahead. where Eddie Hearn said that they are exploring other options, primarily legal action to allow the fight to go ahead, which will set a woeful precedent if the fight does in fact go ahead. Not sure if I've mentioned it, but credit to the Daily Mail for breaking the story in the first place. But as I'm doing my investigations during the course of the day, and I apologise for this lengthy and depressing monologue, but as I'm doing my investigations during the course of the day and speaking to numerous people, it appears that although the story was broke this morning, October 5, the board, Eddie Hearn and Callie Sauerland were all told about the fact that the story would be broken the following day. So they were told about it yesterday, on Tuesday, October 4. We understand through more than one exceptionally reliable source, and I would not be saying it if they were not reliable sources, that the results of this adverse test was shared with all the relevant parties on September the 23rd, which is well over a week ago. Yet only any action was taken today. If you join the dots on that, and I'm not saying that's the case, but if you join the dots on that, some may come to the conclusion that the only reason that the board reacted the way that they have reacted is because the story was broke by the Daily Mail. And if they did not get notification that the story was going to get broke, they would have done nothing. Take the dots a little bit further along, should you dare, and we could have been in a situation where this fight would have gone ahead where we wouldn't have known that one of them would fail a drug test. The real fear is the fight will go ahead regardless. So we go back to looking at it from the point of view of the promoters, and they're just fighting hard to get this fight over the line. There's so much reliant on it financially. It's no secret that this was going to be a huge launch pad for DAZN. You can understand it if you are in the DAZN and the Matchroom business, why you will be fighting very hard to get this over the line. You can understand why the boxers will want to fight. Both of them have come out and said subsequently they want to fight. But then look at it from my point of view, and I'm sick and tired of having this point of view because you feel like you're kind of in the minority. You just want a good and clean and honest sport. And frankly, I was thinking to myself this evening, I was thinking as I was walking around very, very glum and quite sad about the whole thing and just how excited I was just a few hours earlier. And I just think if you offered this out to the public where there was a survey, all these people that have bought tickets, all these people that were planning to watch on Saturday night, all these people that are excited, how many of them will really care if one of them had traces of a fertility drug in their system? How many will really care? And I'd be interested to know. I don't know, but I suspect and fear that the vast majority of people will still want to see this fight go ahead regardless. That's kind of where we're at with it. There's a few things that I'll have missed out. I apologise, I was jumping here and there with that. But that's where we're at with it. And it's just, it's a sham. It's an absolute sham. Surely the bottom line has to be that a fighter has failed a test. And Eddie Hearn's comments today saying that it doesn't, but UKAD are the only drug agency that the British Boxing Board of Control adhere to, therefore this was a VADA test, therefore it doesn't matter, then why on earth are you people paying for VADA testing in the first place if they're just going to ignore the findings and the fight goes ahead regardless? What's the point? What is the point? Last thing I'll say, if the fight goes ahead, and I fear that it will, if the fight goes ahead and Conor Benn has had these adverse findings, I'd like to make it clear I'm not at this point saying he's cheated. I don't know how this has ended up in his system, but the rules have been broken in my mind. The fight goes ahead. Conor Benn wins. Chris Eubank ends up in hospital, heaven forbid. How does the sport recover from that? How on earth does the sport recover from that?
That's a question that is almost impossible to answer, but lots of questions raised by what Matt has just talked you through there regarding the timeline. In the interest of balance, let's paint a picture of one or 2 points. First of all, generally in sport, the reason that fighters, sportsmen and women produce an A and a B sample at the same time from the same urine, just in different bottles. The reason they do that is just in case, for one reason, somehow, unusual, but somehow there is a contaminated sample. And therefore there's a backup plan. There's a parachute, a safety net for the sports people themselves. Just in case. Very unusual, but just in case. As Matt said, there's a couple of times in athletics where that has been the case. It's almost never. But there have been rare precedents where the B sample comes back negative where the A sample was positive, but almost never. The reason that's in place is as a safety net for the sports people themselves. Let me ask you 1 or 2 questions. And it's also worth pointing out, Conor Benn has come out publicly and said he has no idea how that got in his system. I'm a clean athlete, quote unquote. Those are just a couple of points in the interest of balance. What can the board do if the agency that they recognise in the shape of UCAT, the United Kingdom anti-doping setup, if that's the one they recognise, not VADA, and those tests have been passed, do they have any legal footing? Do they have any footing, full stop, to pull the show, bar putting forward their verbal resistance to it?
I think that they could face some legal problems in that, and I suspect that the legal road wouldn't currently be in walk down if there wasn't a strong case to make against them, in that boxers have got a right to be paid, to fulfil contracts, and if the fight is pulled at this point, then they will sacrifice a lot of money. And I suspect that will be the road that that will be the way that the legal battle commences. And the Boxing Board of Control could find themselves, they could find themselves facing a very difficult decision to make. I feel like they've already made it. I feel like they made the right one. I feel like it was the only decision to make. Ultimately, they can do what they want to do. They're the governing body. They're in control. They can say, we don't want anything to do with this. The problem is that then it's already been mentioned. It's been mentioned via more than one person today, and I've heard even Eddie Hearn mention that it's a possibility is that an alien board could come in, like the Luxembourg board came in for Derek Chisora versus David Hay, and they could take this fight on. What kind of job they will do at this notice, God only knows. What kind of officials that they will manage to get, I have no idea. They will be coming in at late notice. Robert Smith of the British Boxing Board of Control is in an exceptionally difficult position here, and I think this highlights, for those that didn't know it already, that the British Boxing Board of Control probably need the promoters more than the promoters need them. They are more or less saying here that, okay, we want you to be happy, but if you're not, we can go elsewhere. We can do this fight anyway. The British Boxing Board of Control largely survive on the money that they get from events like this. The fact that they have come out today, regardless of the amount of time they had to act upon the decision, the fact that they have come out on this and said it is not in the interest of boxing, I think was the right decision, and it's to be commended. Because this will be a significant dent in their own finances by not staging this fight. it's really sad. And I know I'm repeating myself, but if people could only hear the podcast we recorded this morning, where we were more or less bouncing off the walls.
Yeah, it's such a shame. And we're bound to say this, but I think it's one of the best podcasts we've recorded. It really was natural. It flowed. We were bang up for it, so into it. And I suspect we're echoing how you're feeling right now. And, it's not okay to shrug your shoulders. There comes a point when it's not okay just to sigh and say, well, that's boxing. We've said that before, that comment. And some of the lines that are being peddled here, some of the kind of motives that are being put forward are very, very dangerously close to a line that I don't think should be crossed. But I think that's where we're heading. I think that is where we're heading. Are there any parallels, Matt, to be drawn? And let's not forget, the threat of legal action for an organisation like the British Boxing Board of Control, when you're dealing with individuals or organisations who are way more powerful than you are and have significantly more financial muscle than you have, that must be quite an intimidating position to be in. Now, you have to be better than that if you're in the position that the board are in. But that's easy for us to say. We're the ones that don't have to make those decisions. And it's easy to be the moral arbiter when you don't have to stand in the way of the bullets. Let me ask you this, Matt. Are there any similar situations that we can draw on in recent history? I suspect people will say Dillian Whyte against Oscar Rivas, a show that was on and went ahead on Sky, and Oscar Valdez in his fight, what was it, last year, and that ridiculous statement that came out from Maurizio Sullivan in the WBC. Can we draw any links or parallels with those affairs, incidents, situations?
Yeah, I think the Oscar Valdez one is by far and away the most similar.
Just remind us about that.
Yeah, I mean, Oscar Valdez, when he fought Conceição, I think it was last September, which was held in Tucson, where it came to light in the days leading up to the fight that Valdez had failed a test. There was very, very small amounts of an illegal substance that had been found, but he had subsequently tested clean, so that it was ruled that he was a clean fighter going into the fight. And the fight went ahead. Valdez won with a dark cloud over him. And we don't really talk about that anymore, do we? As ever. Valdez went off and had a money-spinning showdown with Shaka Stevenson, and, all is forgotten. And, there comes a point where we can't keep just forgetting these things. We can't just keep making it up as we go along. We can't keep breaking rules and just expecting the rest of the world not to take notice. And kind of as an aside, one only has to look at the plight of the amateur code at the moment in terms of Olympic boxing. And the IOC obviously got sick to death of AIBA's poor governance, with poor decisions, poor financial goings on, and the sport of boxing doesn't look like it will be in the Olympics for after 2024. That should be a warning to everybody that this kind of, we're just going to keep doing what we're going to do, bollocks to the rules, that it ultimately has no consequence. I believe that should be a warning. But who's going to step in really into this murky world of boxing and put some rulers down and put some guides down and tell people that they can't keep doing that? The most depressing thing about this today is that the board came out and said, we have told them that this fight is prohibited, and they subsequently went public and said that the fight is going ahead, and have subsequently said that they will seek legal action, and it is currently a legal case. And I suspect that they wouldn't have gone down that road if they haven't got a very good case.
Well, the whole Oscar Valdez situation was okay, because let's not forget, Maurizio just came out afterwards and said, we think Oscar Valdez is telling the truth and he's a good guy. So that's that. we place our trust in our interpretation of people's characters rather than the testing procedure of organisations like VADA in this instance. And there are a couple of videos emerging today on Twitter in particular. One's a recent interview with Eddie Hearn where he was saying that he would have liked to see VADA contracted testing very much in the contract for the Buatsi-Pascal fight, even although that's a fight that's not on his platform. And there's another video up there currently on Twitter where, again, Eddie is putting VADA as preference to UKAD in terms of how he perceives those organisations. And yet today the line that's been peddled is, well, UKAD tests are fine, so that's what we're going to go with. And it's not too difficult, therefore. You don't need to be a cynic or a conspiracy theorist to simply think that, and you might have sympathy for the fighters, you might think all this hard work, the fans that have bought tickets, that the show must go on. And I understand anyone who has some inkling of that as an idea, of course. But ultimately, it's not that difficult really to see how important this is for DAZN in particular, for Matchroom as a business, that the show must go on. The money must roll in. And I think more worryingly, Matt, if what you're saying is right from your sources, your reliable sources, that the promoters and the board knew about that back on the 23rd of September. You said over a week. Yeah, by my maths, that's 10 to 12 days, Matt. It's way over a week. That's a lot of time. And it wouldn't be unfair, I don't think, to draw a conclusion that the only reason we've not heard about this since then is either because there was a desire to hush it up, or you could say more cynically that leaving it late or not leaving it at all meant that the B sample would have to be tested after the fight has taken place. And by that time, the show's been on, everyone's been paid, the money's in the coffers, and then that story, a bit like Valdez, will be old news in another couple of weeks' time, if your sources are correct.
I can't disagree with any of that. Whichever way, how can you look at that in another way? How can you draw any other conclusion from that? I don't think you can.
For us to sit here and say that is pretty heartbreaking, isn't it?
You know what, Alex? It's really heartbreaking. This sport. I look around me now. I'm looking around in my office. All of these books I've got on boxing that I've been collecting since I was 8 years old, 7, 8 years old. All these magazines behind me. This sport that I absolutely adore. And my reaction earlier on this afternoon was, when I was talking to somebody, and I said, if this fight goes ahead, I'm out. This could be the final straw for me. But it probably won't be, will it? It probably won't be, because something else will come along and it'll, I don't know. But at the same time, in a perverse kind of a way, as a journalist, I've enjoyed, in a way, being a journalist today. But what a crying shame that we're having to uncover these kind of things.
Yeah. I mean, the thing with the B sample as well is, if you are, and that safety net for a fighter is there, it's there so you use it when you need it most. That should be the other point we're making here. And if that was known on the 23rd, Conor Benn should know that ASAP from the 23rd. I don't know if that's minutes, hours, or maybe a day. But, I mean, a day would be stretching it before he knows that from the 23rd. I would say you have a duty of care and responsibility as a promoter. He should know that as soon as possible. And if that's me, and I'm a clean athlete, I demand that B sample is tested ASAP, within minutes, within hours. So why hasn't it? And I actually, it really upsets me to think about the answer, to be honest with you. It's horrible. Horrible. But that's where we're at. That's where we're at, folks. There may be other stories unfolding in the coming days regarding the WBC's own CARES VADA program. It was touted as the WBC Clean program previously as well, for which many of the Sky DAZN fighters signed up for. Though you may recall back in January, am I right in saying Conor Benn was one of 5 who hadn't yet or weren't on it, and therefore they were going to be taken out of the ratings? Remember, Chris Billam-Smith was one, but he said it was simply a case of, I think he'd been on holiday, he was moving house, so he had a genuine excuse for it, and he rectified that within days as well. So I don't know if that's something that's going to unfold. There's going to be more digging, Matt, and there's probably, by the time people are listening to this podcast, there's probably other bits and pieces that are going to emerge.
Yeah, I mean, we're in a really, really difficult position. I think that the boxing media is in a really difficult position. As things stand, the press conference is still going ahead tomorrow. By the time people listen to this, it'll probably be later on today. I mean, we're still hoping to get this out on Wednesday night. Looks like it's going to be really late on Wednesday night that this podcast will come out. So on Thursday, as things stand, the press conference will go ahead. I can only imagine the scenes there. I mean, I still plan to go to that and continue and do my job as a journalist if, of course, I'm welcome there. You find that with boxing, increasingly, if you're doing your job correctly, you're making enemies of promoters. And I was thinking this about, not wishing to kind of bring Frank Warren into it, but I was thinking about the spat that Boxing News and Frank Warren had recently, and I was just almost wanted to say to Frank, look, you're looking at it from the point of view of a promoter. You're the promoter, so you're going to get riled with my opinion, but I'm justified to my opinion. But with this is a whole different ball game. This is a failed test. I don't care if Conor Benn, if it was a complete accident. It might well be. We are very quick as an industry to hear that someone has failed a test and then presume that they are cheating. But the bottom line is there has to be some responsibility from the athlete about what goes in their body. They have to be conscientious about what goes in their body. And if they've made a mistake, then they've made a mistake. But that doesn't mean that a fight should go ahead when rules have bbeen broken. Particularly if all we're going to get is, which we too often get, is, I don't know. I just don't know how that's happened. I'm so clean. You ask anybody, I'm a clean athlete. If that's all we're getting, that's not good enough. I would have a lot more respect for boxers if, when they did fail a test, if they were honest.
Yeah, and not at any stage in this pod so far, 30 odd minutes in, not at any stage have we said that Conor Benn, and rightly so, and we won't. I'm not saying Conor Benn's guilty as charged. There has been a positive test. It needs to be investigated. How do you investigate it? You double check with a B sample. Though that's the procedure in place to make sure that the truth is outed. That's the process. That's sport's own process, and boxing is part of that. And we hope, fans, regulars who listen to this podcast, hope that B sample, should it be, and hopefully it is tested, and it does come back negative. That's what we want. That's what we hope. But it doesn't mean how things look are more important now than ever before. It doesn't mean the show goes on. As expensive and Ben Shalom. This is the second time in 5 weeks you and I have done a pod that nobody will hear. And that's not because there's no one listening, thankfully, because you are regularly. We love your support. We appreciate it. And pretty much every iTunes review that we get, and I was going to read out, and we ran out of time today, I was going to read out some, but pretty much every iTunes review that we get says something like, balanced, impartial, honest and passionate. Those are always the words that are used. And I think they're a fair reflection of how we go about it, how we feel about the sport, and how we try to behave individually as human beings and as broadcasters and as journalists. It's the kind of people we are, and we can't be anything else. And so we hope that B sample is negative. But it doesn't mean that the show goes on. And how things look are more important now than ever before.
100%. I mean, what needs to happen now is that we need to find out, or there needs to be some kind of investigation into how this substance did end up in Conor Benn's body. And you would hope that they are keeping a record of everything that he's eating, everything that he's drinking. If they're not, that's negligence in the extreme for an athlete in this size of event, that they can't go back and pinpoint exactly why something like this may have ended up in their system. I think Oscar Valdez came back and said it was herbal tea. It was herbal tea that he was drinking. Canelo, prior to the second fight with Golovkin, which was after he'd served a 6-month ban, there was a story that, I'm not sure if I broke it, but I was the first. I was certainly, when I spoke to Mauricio and some other people about it, was that they had pinpointed the exact restaurant and meal in which Canelo had eaten this steak. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. But we have no reason to think that it's not true, or it's too easy to think that it's not true. But just this, I don't know. I'm a clean athlete. It just won't wash. It just will not wash. There has to be an element of responsibility taken here. There absolutely has to be. And for Eddie Hearn now to be so passionate about this rule that UKAD are the only drug testing agency that matter to the British Boxing Board of Control, compared to some of the things he said in the past, where he's clearly made it quite clear the respect he has for the work that VADA do, is such a woeful look for him, a promoter I genuinely have respect for. It is such a woeful look for him that it highlights how desperate he is above anything else for this event to go ahead. It's not for the good of the sport. It's not for the good of the boxers, although you could argue they're getting paid. It is because he wants this event to do well and DAZN to launch their pay-per-view platform in the UK with a real bang. And it looked like they were going to, and I was all in for that. I had no qualms with DAZN doing it on pay-per-view, none whatsoever. But now you're going to ask people to pay 20 quid, 30 quid for a fight where one of them has failed a test. I mean, I'm not sure if we've spoke about it, but tonight there was going to be a programme on BBC One about this fight, promoting this fight. It was going to be on primetime BBC One. The BBC have opted not to show it. So when we go back to what I was saying about who's going to come in and give the sport a kick up the backside and say you can't do this like the IOC have done to AIBA, or what used to be AIBA, perhaps nobody will need to, because it won't take long before broadcasters get sick and tired of this absolute shambolic nonsense occurring far too frequently in the sport and nothing appearing to be done about it. DAZN have invested an insane amount of money in boxing. There are other sports out there. Sky Sports continue to invest a lot of money in boxing. BT Sport continue to invest a lot of money in boxing. It's only going to take someone different to be at the head of these broadcasters to turn around and say, do you know what? I can't even be bothered. I can't even be bothered with this sport anymore. Let's take that money that we spend out of boxing, put it into football, put it into rugby, put it into whatever, And boxing increasingly will just be this dirty little sport that exists in corners and is not the showcase sport that if it was run correctly, it would be. It has the potential to be the greatest sport on planet Earth, but the lack of governance and this kind of nonsense just occurring days before an event, and the event will still go ahead. Who can call boxing one of the greatest sports on earth?
Well, I was going to say, how must this look to the outside world beyond boxing's bubble? How must this look? But I think the BBC putting that documentary tonight, that kind of gives you the answer that you already know. You don't need me or Matt to tell you that. You know the answer anyway, don't you? One thing I will say, and it's why I said it, I think on the pod last week or the week before, that I've never really been in favour of blanket bans. You test positive, you're out, lifetime bans. I've never been in favour of that because, and there's been a couple of instances in horse racing in particular, and one literally in the last couple of weeks, and it's taken a annoyingly, and typically in British horse racing style, it's taken a couple of years to unfurl and solve. But it has happened on a few occasions where there has been either contaminated feed, very, very small trace elements of contaminated feed that horses have ingested, or in this case that's happened in the last couple of weeks where the bedding on which they were lying in their stable was contaminated and had some kind of trace element of a banned substance as well. And that's why I've never... There are situations where it will get in there where it shouldn't be, but there are valid excuses for it being in there. And I'm all in favour of getting to the bottom of that. And who knows, maybe there's something of that at play here. I don't know if it is, I don't know if it isn't. But that's what testing is all about.
Oh, Alex, I completely agree with every word of that. And please don't mistake my anger and sadness as... I'm not directing that at Conor Benn. I'm directing that at the system, or lack of, that this fight can go ahead when rules have been broken. What we need to remember, and I think this is probably a good way of summing it up, is that he had tests on a certain day that were conducted by VADA where there was adverse findings in that test. Had the test been carried out on that day by UCAD, then those adverse findings would have been there as well. And if the test had been carried out on that day by UCAD, the fight would have been called off. But it's not. And again, it's just try and explain it to somebody. Well, hang on a minute. So he's failed a test with VADA, but he's passed them all with UCAD. Okay. So why do we need all these different drug testing agencies? And it's like a conversation you've had a million times about sanctioning bodies. And it all goes back to the same thing. There is no overriding governance. There is not one governing system in place that will conduct the drug tests. They will compile fair and honest rankings. They will put some kind of scheduling in place. And it just goes back to that again and again and again and again. And while there are so many agencies involved, it just opens the doors for rules to be manipulated, and for the sport, frankly, to look like it hasn't got a clue what on earth it's doing or what is going on. And yet again, we're faced with that. I'll be interested to see what happens in the next few days. I'll be really interested to see what happens. But if the fight goes ahead, I'm not convinced that I want to be there. And like you, although I'm not saying it was the best matched fight on paper in the world, this whole Benn versus Eubank storyline had got me hook, line and sinker. and I had this renewed enthusiasm to go and cover an event from top to bottom this week. And that has gone. And the fact that I'm still sitting here in exactly the same place as where you and I were talking 12 hours ago and I was on cloud nine is just so depressing. So very depressing. And you would think if we knew, if people knew on September the 23rd that this really shouldn't have got this far. And the fact that it has got this far after all that time is almost as bad as the fact there was a failed test in the first place.
It's been a ridiculous, extraordinary, upsetting and difficult day. And if you want to read about how that unfolded, Matt has done an article on Boxing News Online where he sort of echoed the most of the telling factors from it at the start of the pod, and that is Chris Eubank Jr. versus Conor Benn, the story of a grim day for British boxing. So that it'll be in the latest section. It won't necessarily be on the articles that you see on the front page of the boxingnewsonline.net page, but if you go onto the latest news, you'll find that article if you want to go and have a look at it, and it'll underline but flesh out some of the things that we talked about at the start of the pod. And Matt's right, it's not difficult, it's easy in fact to feel differently about this fight now, and it's such a shame because earlier on today we were full of it and we were bang up for it and we were right into it. And you'll probably hear what's coming up next, where we're going to talk about this week. We might as well still include that on the pod. Having recorded that earlier on, you probably hear it in our voices, the kind of form we were in. And I think you probably get quite an effusive, ebullient message from me at the end, where I say tune in every day this week for bonus pods left, right and centre. Whether that actually happens, that remains to be seen. Matt and I will talk about that. We're gonna hook up down in London for the press conference tomorrow, and we'll see where that takes us. And I must admit, right now, the way we're both feeling, I don't think either of us have any idea at all. But thanks for tuning in. Thanks for your continued support. Keep the reviews coming in. Tell your friends. And next up is what we recorded earlier when we were in better mood. It is a Battle of Britain from the 90s coming up in this week.